Prince William, Indiana was founded in 1837 by Benjamin Ashbrook. He owned a lot of the lots, and there's a lot of mystery of some of the who bought some lots, because a lot of the family took over lots. He had a lot of children and grandchildren in town. But Lot 1 initially was founded in 1837. It was the minister Charles and Rachel Craig. He was a minister in town. He was there from 1837 to 1846. When he moved out, Samuel Henry moved in and built a tavern on that spot in the 1840s and 50s. And he started the tavern in 1851, but he owned a lot in 1846. Well, that didn't last very long, and Dr. Samuel Presley came to town. He was the first doctor, 1849 to 1854 on that lot. His wife was Sarah, and they were both from Ohio. And Samuel and Rachel Miller owned it from 1853 to 54. I don't know much about them. They were only there a year or two. But then Dr. Samuel G. Irwin came to town. He was a surgeon and doctor. He was married to an Elizabeth who had divorced while in town. Well, he ended up marrying Samuel Henry's daughter, and it was a big scandal.
Scandals.
So what happened, if you look a few years later, both of the doctor and the Henry family left. Henry family had different lots too, but they all left town. So you kind of wonder what happened there. So after Irwin left, next would have been Thomas Williams. He was a painter for the Jacob Fisher Wagon Works in town. He owned that lot 1. And he was there for only a couple of years. And then William Stranahan. He was from Ireland. He was there from the 1850s to 1866. And then the lot split.
Oh, there you go.
And it became a west lot and an east lot. Well, about that time, Samuel Weaver came to town, and he built the woolen mill outside of town, and there's a mill race still there, which would be south and a little bit of west of where the lot 1 is.
Oh.
So
would that be southwest? So it'd be
up here.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah. And so then he had a store in lot 1 there, but it split, and he had lot 1 west and lot 1 east belonged to James Shields, and he was an Irishman, but he had the store. So there was a store on both lot 1 west and east, and that's where the post office was in the 1850s. Well, James Shields sold to his brother Hugh Shields, and he had a store, and he was also the postmaster a little later on in the 1860s. Well, lot 1 west was sold to Lorenzo Chisholm, and he had the store and the woolen mill there for a few years until, I think, in the 1870s. William Orr owned the property there for a year. But then in lot 1 west, William H. Weaver, who was Samuel's son, owned the lot in the 1880s, and he was a stockbroker, so he had stocks. There was a little stockyard there with the store, I guess. And then by 1914, John Livingston bought the land. That's when he started tearing down the buildings. That's just lot 1.
So, yeah.
Okay, lot 2, which is a little bit west, and it's on the Main Street. Main Street is now the 725 South, and it heads west. The other street's Washington, which is north of it. And then the other 2 streets, the Plank Road is Frankfort Street. And if the west street there, it's running north and south, is High Street. So those are the names of your 4 streets: High Street, Frankfort Street, Washington Street, and Main Street. Well, lot 2 was on Main Street heading west in town. Hezekiah Ashby, the town's founder's son, owned the lot, and he sold it to Dr. Presley, 1849 to 1854. Then Dr. Irwin actually owned that lot. So did the Williams guy. So the same people owned that lot that owned that lot 1 east. And it looks like it's the same people all the way through there. So lot 3 is the next one west heading on Main Street. Edward and Nahart. That was an early family. They married into the Ashbas. That's why they were early, 1837, 1854. And let's see, Peter O'Farrell was there early. But at some point in the 1860s, Benjamin Ashby sometime before 1863, he had bought the land back. The Nahart families had left. He was family of his son-in-law, so he bought the land when he left town. And I think he's out somewhere in Tippecanoe County is where he ended up, one of the little towns out there.
Okay.
And it looks like Livingston got that in 1914, so he's the same guy that tore down all the other buildings. Heading to lot 4, which is heading west on Main Street, on the south side of the road. Benjamin Ashby owned that. Jacob Steller owned it for 1 year from 49 to 50. I don't know who he was. His wife was Mary. And then 1862, John Julius. He had quite a few lots in town. He was from Germany. They had it would have been an inn here in town. I think it's right in here. Right outside of town. It's not a lot number, but they had the stagecoach stop.
Okay.
They actually had a little restaurant in there they cooked.
Wow.
I guess his wife was a very good cook and they came from all around to eat her food. So he owned that up until 1906, where George Bowen had bought it, had it for 6 years. And then Blacksmith had had it for just a little while. His name was Josiah Fatzinger. Well, he ended up in Frankfort, and there's still a Fatzinger building. It's right off the square in Frankfort.
Ah.
Lot 5 is the next building, which is the last lot
Yeah.
on the south side of the town. Benjamin Ashby owned it. Jacob Steller had owned it, 1849 to 50. John Julius, same people. And Hugh Compton. He was there early. I guess he was before Julius. Got a wine there, but he was an early town member too. He and his family. I don't know what happened to him. And then Ashby had bought it back by the time he had died in 1863, and then it ended up in John Livingston again. But in 1905, I guess I forgot that part, William S. and Katria Bowen lived there, and I have a picture of them in front of their house in 1905. I didn't bring that. I got a whole file of pictures. And then it ended up in George Bowen. It must have been one of his brothers, owned it for up till 1912, and then again John Livingston had it by 1914. So how about we just stop there?
Yeah.
That one line.
Get it. After yeah. Yeah, so yeah.
Take a break. We're taking a break from the lots. We went through the south side of the Main Street, lots 1 through 6. The Corey had asked the question, when was the population basically the biggest part of the town?
Was the peak, yeah.
I think about 1870, there was 200 people.
Okay.
A lot of these houses, they had 8 to 10 people in them. Sometimes, and I haven't included all the people that lived outside of town here. There's all kinds of families. I have all that information too because they're kind of intertwined with the town, but there's so many different families that I haven't added here. But 1870 is probably the peak. The railroads came through Sedalia, Cutler, Rossville, Moran. One of them came through in 1873. That would have been the Terre Haute to Logansport, which would have been the Logansport and Southwestern, Crawfordsville, Southwestern. So that's when the guys started moving out and going to Sedalia and Cutler. The Bowen family went to Cutler. The Shields family went to Sedalia. Samuel Weaver went to Rossville. So by the 1880s, I think, is when the second railroad went through, that went through Rossville in 1882. And that's basically sealed the town's fate.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, 1852, there was a serious road. They had all kinds of money raised and everything. It would have came through in 1852, and it would have been a 25-mile shorter route between Indianapolis and Chicago. Well, there was a parent that had a house in Prince William, and he made a deal, and somehow he ended up being a vice president of the bank over in Lafayette after this deal where they decided not to build the railroad. Because if that railroad would have came through in 1852, the town would still been there
Yeah.
at this point. It would have been an early railroad, because I think Logansport and Delphi didn't get their railroad until 1852, going east-west. But it was just one of those deals where, somebody would have lost some money somewhere, so they made a deal not to send it through.
Right.
And then there was actually interurbans that were supposed to come through all the way up through about 1920. They never materialized. I have all that information too. But yeah, 200 people probably, and then by the 1920s there were probably 20 to 30 people there.
Mm-hmm.
Gas station was still there in the 20s. I think it probably closed during the Depression. There was a store they set up until the 30s. F. Watson had the last store, lot 12. And then there was a gas station, lot 24, that was there in the 20s. So, I mean, there was a few people left. Gracie Davis, F. Watson, the Davises, Taylors. My third great-grandfather's daughter lived there until she died in 1940, so she was there. So, yeah, it just steadily declined from 1870 on until basically it was over in the 20s. The school closed in 1920, so that's when your town started going.
Probably the Great Depression probably didn't help with that. Also.
Well, I think in 28 or 29 is when the highway went from Delphi to Rossville, the current highway.
Yeah, because
it was Highway 6 there through Prince William until about 1928, I think, 27, whatever that year that was. So that was the final straw when they changed the highway route, because it's still called the Prince William Road. And we'll see that as we go out through town. We'll see that it said Delphi Street coming out of town here, which doesn't make any sense unless it's a previous name, which makes sense then. Yeah, there was all kinds of businesses over the years, anything from shoemakers, bootmakers, tanners, coopers, painters. I've got to list all that. I can read to you here in a few minutes. Steam sawmill, wool mill. They had an inn there that took people from. It was basically the 8-mile stops heading east of what I went to Lex, or the town called Walker post office, and then Burlington would have been the next stop on that one, the Lafayette to Kokomo Road. But then you had the Delphi to Frankfort, so when I came to Rossville, and then south to Frankfort, and then north to Delphi. So it was a crossroads early on too.
Yeah.
And that ended in the 1860s, so there's another reason. Just little things over the years added up. There was never a church in town. There was a minister early on, Mr. Craig. He was Mr. Craig in Lot 1, but never had a church. So that probably is part of the reason the town also died. Many reasons.
Yeah.
His post office name was changed in 1882 to Darcy. This was a staunch Democrat. It's called Democrat Township.
Right.
And Dorsey was a Republican, so everybody called it Darcy instead. Instead of D-O-R-S-E-Y, they called it D-A-R-C-Y, because they didn't like Dorsey because he's a Republican, so the name of the post office was Dorsey. Darcy, I mean. It was only there a few years, and then I think what happened is the last postmaster, they took away all but $1 of her money, and so she said she wasn't going to do it for $1, so they closed it, and the mail went to Rossville. That was in 1887. So who knows? Maybe if it kept going there for a while, if they kept paying the lady.
So the post office pretty much moved to,
Yeah,
Rossville.
it became a real delivery.
Yeah.
That happened in the 1880s. So, I mean, like I said, there's a combination of things why this never thrived. It was...
Once you get the post office, that's when you're in town. Yeah.
But, if you go out of Delphi, it still says Prince William Road on the signs. And you can travel that whole route that was the Plank Road all the way to Frankfort. And it's still known as the Prince William Road. Stables for the inn was there. Just all kinds of fun things.
Middle Fork Creek, is that part of Wildcat?
Yeah, you have the South Fork, which goes a little bit north of Frankfort. And you have the Kilmore Creek, which goes through Kilmore, which is north of that, and then in the Middle Fork, which is the little town of Middle Fork on 26 and 29, it's the same creek that goes through here. It's about between 725 and 750 south, just a little stream. But in the 1860s, after the Civil War, one of the storekeepers, you had a general, I think it was a dry goods store, his name was Matthew McInerney, and he was a captain of the Civil War. There was a warehouse in Middle Fork, and during the spring when it was flooding, he loaded up a boat and brought it all down to the Prince William and then loaded it. And that is a tiny stream, so it must have really been flooding, but he probably saved a few dollars, and he was from the Civil War, so he decided I was going to go do this.
Yeah.
So I had an article where he had brought some money down, brought some inventory for his store out of Middle Fork. Which I think is hilarious.
Middle Fork, that's a town itself?
Yeah, it was founded in 1836. It was there's nothing left. They just tore down the school. I went to church there for a while in the 1990s. There was a church there. It's been gone.
How far away is Middle Fork
From Prince William?
Orleans?
Oh, wow. Probably 12 miles.
12 miles? I never heard that one either.
But yeah, that would have been a long haul for that guy on that stream. Could you imagine? He had to have lost some of his inventory along the way. Unless it was flooded. And I don't know. Maybe they kept it cut out better back then. There's like all of these trees that are overgrown it now, so I don't know how he would have got down.
It's been a bigger creek.
But, during the spring, it said during the spring, so I imagine it was flooded.
Yeah.
We thought, well, just save some money. Let's put it on this creek and take it down.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of stories, and we can get to those later with like Nancy Scott and Jacob Fisher, and Samuel Weaver, Hugh Shields, some of the bigger names of the town. But my favorite name is probably my third great-grandfather, James Looper, who lived there from 1914 to 1916, and I have an article, Prince William Man Dies, 1916 there.
Well, this paper?
And that was my third great-grandfather. He died in town there in age 83 in 1916. And I didn't know that until I had 5,000 hours into this thing. My second great-grandmother, her name was Martha Tyler, but in the article it says Pyler. So the day I found that there's no way this could be my relative, because it said Pyler, and it's the only one misspelled. And so it was like one of those one in the morning things. It's like, there's no way this can't be my great-great-grandmother's dad. So I got back in and looked through and matched it through another family line. It's like, they just misspelled and I was so excited I couldn't sleep that night, realizing that my great-great-great-grandfather died there. And we lived there for 3 years, but one of my great-great-grandmother's sisters had a town lot there, Laura Taylor, and that's where he went to die with. But he had 15 children. And he ended up going, of all places, this little town that I ended up researching and had 5,000 hours in before I discovered it. Is that not weird?
Yeah.
You want to move on to the next lot? Let me give you some overview here. We talked about the County Line Middle Fork Church. I'll show you where that is when we leave. John DuBois bought his property all on the east side of town in the 1940s, 1943. Thomas Chapel School, which is a mile north. It was a church in the little town of Xenia. I'll show you where that is. That's where a lot of the town people went to church. I found a lot of articles over the years of so-and-so from Prince William would go to church there. There were doctors in town from 1849. Dr. Presley, And then Dr. Irwin was there in 1854 to 57. Dr. Borger, 1868 to 75. Dr. First Champion, 1876 to 1880. And then you had some, after 1880, you had, and basically that's when the town died, you had these traveling doctors that came through, Dr. Truball and Sigler, Clark, just a few others there. So that's another reason the town was gone by 1880. The doctor had left. It was Prince William School number 7. I have a list of all the teachers starting in 1850 all the way until it closed in 1920. Nellie Pritch, she was the last teacher. I think her last name was Jones. She married Jones, but she's buried out here in the Rossville Cemetery. And there's a picture of her. She was the very first resident of the Milner Nursing Home out here. It opened like 1970. So that was kind of neat.
Nursing home?
It's a Milner Nursing Home on the east side of town here on the north side. Opened
Okay.
about 1970. She was the very first resident. And she was the last school teacher of Prince William. I thought that was a neat connection. We already went into this. Did I discuss the 65 Civil War on video yet? There were 65 Civil War veterans that either lived before, during, or after in town, Prince William, or was in the recruiting office at Prince William.
They had a recruiting office.
65 men. Usually it was either the 86th, the 72nd, or the 33rd Cavalry. But there was other divisions too that were. There was one Major Hannum, who built the Plank Road in 1850, and then the Captain Matthew, and he ended up going to Cutler too. He was another one when the town died. He went to Cutler and opened a business. And then I have a picture when they moved Pennsylvania bought the line off of the Vandalia Railroad in Cutler. There's a picture when they're moving the depot, and on the side of it, it says Bowen, and that's where the tavern was in Cutler. So Bowen had a tavern after we left here in Cutler, after Bowen. I heard a lot of stories about the Bowen family after that lived there. Actually, I did a book on Cutler basketball, and one of the Bowens was on the team in the teens, one of his sons. But there were 5 men, or 7 men, I'm sorry, that were from Prince William that died in the Civil War. Benjamin A. Ashba, town founder's grandson, Elijah Ashba Jr., James M. Ashba, another grandson, James H. Huntley, who was presumed to be dead, but he dropped the H and he was here the rest of his life, and he never used the word H, the initial H again. So he was presumed dead, but he didn't die. The H is matched up and everything.
Yeah.
Usual Misner, he died, Wilson Saylor, and Elias Scott. Those were the men that died from Prince William that were either part of the recruiting office or lived in town. And then James Chittick, he was in the Mexican War, who died. He didn't technically live in town. The Chittick family had land just outside of town, but I include him because his brother Thomas lived in town, and his dad lived in town, so that's why I've included him in part of the memorial to Prince William Town. He died and buried at sea, but his wife was buried in Ball Hill Cemetery years later, and I have a picture of that as one of my records too. There was a Knights of Golden Circle in Prince William that was, have you heard of that one, Corey?
Yeah.
Well, there was one, and I have evidence. I have proof, actually. There was a lot of talk there in the articles, but it was a secret society, and how would you know? But a boy named Robert Peltz, Peltz, stumbled in, there's an article, or I can't remember what it was, but basically it said he was 16 years old and he accidentally stumbled into one of their meetings in Prince William in town.
No.
And they told him if he ever said anything, they would kill him. Well, I matched up his age. He's buried out here in Rossville. There's actually a man named Ball Peltz that matched up the age in 1863 when he was 16. And so I'm sure that story was true. Supposedly they had caches of gold and silver to help the South.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that a lot of these people were from Virginia, North Carolina. There's a few of them were the Chitticks were from New York, but a lot of them were from Virginia and South that came up here.
Wow. All the way up there.
So that's maybe they had connections. But yeah, that's another part of the Prince William lore and history. Also, throughout this part, Dennis Leach, who lives just south of town on the steam sawmill property. He has a house, a barn, another house maybe where his mother lived. He told me he bought the house in the late 60s, and the guy kept coming around. He would fuel his house, the guy with the fuel, propane or oil, whatever it was. And he said that he kept telling him that John Dillinger would leave his cars here. It was one of the stories he remembers in that barn. And he said that he just blew it off, that this was 50-some years ago, but he believes that why would this be the guy was adamant. But the guy was an older man telling the story that from the oil or propane or whatever it was, he was like in his 60s. So if you go back, it was 68, so the guy was born in like 07. Well, he would have been about 20 in the Dillinger days, so it all matches. He would have known.
It would add up, yeah.
But he said that, he left cars out there, getaway cars in the barn. Who knows? It's another legend lore from Pennsylvania.
He shows up a lot, John Dillinger.
Yeah.
I noticed that.
Yeah. I don't know why he would make something up like that.
Yeah.
I mean, just don't know.
Could always be.
So should we go on to lot 7?
Lot 7?
Where's that at? Is that on?
That's
Okay, so it'll be on the north side of that.
South. It's like Main Street, High Street.
Yeah. Corner of Main and High, this northwest corner. Lot 7. Let's see. John Watt. I don't know anything about the man. He owned the lot until 1839, so he was only there a few years. But supposedly that Edward Nahard, who married Ashby's daughter, was there up until 1854. And then the Fatzinger, who was a blacksmith, had it for a few years in the 1850s. Then it moved on to William Gibbs. I don't know much about him. And then Louisa and Stephen Mink owned it in the 1880s. The Swander family. There was Daniel, Caroline, Ed, and Sarah. They owned it in the 1880s to the 1900s. And I don't know much after that. I missed some point. Probably John Livingston had bought it, just like the rest of them. I didn't give him that, but I'm sure that's what happened. Okay, lot 8. Where's that at? It'd be east of there. It's on the alley and Main Street. Caleb Compton owned it in 1837. That's one of the first years of the town. Lydia Spears owned it in 1860, and then Maynard Guard had it 1883 to 1887. I didn't find anything else on that, so it must have went back to John Livingston. Like I said, 1914. Lot 9 is Lyman Compton, another brother probably of Caleb there, early 1837. 1866, James Ashby, probably one of the sons or grandsons of the town founder. And then Dr. Borger and his wife Sarah was there from 1868 to 1875. When he left, Dr. Garth Champion bought it 1876 to 1880. And then Alfred Bowen, who had the store, he was from Pennsylvania. He was there in the James Reed was there in the 1870s. He was a merchant. And then Alfred Bowen bought that in the 1880s. So it sounds like to me either their home or it was a store. And then the Roush's house. So which one is that? Is that lot, what are we talking about? Lot 8?
We're 9.
Okay. So Fred Roush owned it in the 1870s, and then Captain McInerney owned it in the 1860s. So I forgot about him. And then the last one was John and Mary Collins. They had it from 1915 to 1941, and then Livingston bought it. So that was lot 9. Lot 10, where's that at?
It's right on Plain Group.
So that's on the corner of Frankfort Street and Main Street, right? Frankfort.
Yeah.
And Main Street. Benjamin Ashba owned that. So that was a town founder. James had it in 1868. Dr. Champion probably had his doctor's office there in 1876 to 1880. And then Alfred Bowen owned it. So that was probably a store of some sort, or like a doctor's office. So it was right on the main. And then Captain McInerney, Matthew McInerney, owned it from 1886 to 1872. He was from Ireland. And then Maynard Guard owned it from 1883 to 1887. The Young family had it until 1901 after that. William B. Young. Then the Collins had it. John W. and Nancy J. Collins had it from 1915 to 1941, and then Livingston bought it. Probably tore it down, 41. So that's what happened to the town. You see, this Livingston's kept buying all these town lots. And he either moved them out or he tore them down.
Sheesh.
So what's that take us to? 12?
Like 11, I think.
Yeah, 11. Okay, Caleb Compton. Where's that house at?
It's right there.
Okay, that's the one still there. Let's see. Over the years, storekeepers had it. James Shield, James Reed, Fred Roush, William Nipper in 1880s. So that was a store. On the corner, they said that there was a tavern. So this house is still there, but on the corner there was a tavern there, and it ended up being a beauty shop sometime in the 20s or 30s, I think they said, maybe in the 40s. There was a little beauty shop there. That's what Steve Matchett told me. The boys had told him. So yeah, that's his house that's remaining. Gary Du Bois bought it in 1943. But it was a store and tavern. So there was a tavern there too. The tavern at one point in 1 and tavern at one point in 11. Lot 12, you had George H. Richardson. I don't have much on him. We think he was a storekeeper because it's another store lot. Where's that at? Yeah. Abel Slayback, 1849, 1851. The Herr family owned it all the way up until 1903. But yeah, I think that was also a store. I heard that that's where Hef Watson had the last store in the 1920s, 30s. Lot 13.
Right there.
Okay, still on Frankfort Road, and that's corner of Frankfort and Washington, right?
Oh, yeah.
Peter. Oh, Daniel Egler. I don't know much about him. He had it in 1837. By 1852, Peter and Sarah Ouida Geiger had it until 54. John Julius, 1862. He's the one that had a lot of land, and he had a tavern too at some point in one of the lots. John Kammerer had it in the 1860s, 1880. He was a boot and shoemaker, so that was a business lot 12. And I can't read the name. Samuel, 1855 to 65. Another businessman. So we're on lot 13. Is that right?
Yeah, that's where we're at. 14.
Yeah, William McNeil had that early on too, from 1841 to 50. He was a constable of the town, so it was a business. William Minton had it for 1 year in the 1850s, and Leroy Thompson, who built bridges in the teens and 20s, had it, and then he sold it to John Livingston, 1941. Lot 14.
Maybe
Yeah,
this.
it's on the alley in Washington Street. Edward Nahard, who married the Ashby's daughter, 1837 to 54. Dr. Irwin owned it. Probably the house, I'd guess, for Irwin's. John Julius, the bootmaker, had it from 1860 to 18. That's probably their house. In front, this would have been the business, and that would have been the house.
Oh, yeah, it's right next door.
Since it wasn't on the main street.
Yeah.
James Reed, another businessman. John Reeve had it as a storekeeper. 1880s to 1890s. Sarah Reeve, 1914. John Collins had it 1915, and then it went to Livingston, 1941. Gone. Lot 15, Thomas Chittick. The Chittick family, yeah, early. He died in 1855, but he had a lot of family. His dad, Archibald, was living with him in the 1840s. And then Samuel and Susanna Patrick, I think they were landlords. They owned it 1855 to 65. John Collins owned it. Oh, I forgot. 1868, Fatzinger, who was a blacksmith, owned it. James Fatzinger. John Reed had a storekeeper, 1880s, 90s. John Feltoff founded at one point, 1870. But once again, sold to John Livingston, 1941. Gone. Lot 16, where's that at?
Right off the
I think that's the school. But I think maybe maybe there was a house on that lot too. Moses Nahar, who married the town founder's daughter, was there 1837 to 40. John Walls was there with his wife Mary in the 1850s and 60s. Fatzinger, Josiah, blacksmith, 1868. William Hughes had it from 1875 to 85. He was a farmer. John Reed's store keeper, 1880 to 1890. So it looks like it went to John Livingston, 1941. Lot 17,
Right there.
just off of High Street. Okay. Samuel Nevin, early, 1870 to 1866. Carolyn Nagel had it in 1870. And then the Stout family had it in 1860s. Not much on that. It's kind of off the, after that, there wasn't much there. Of course, John Livingston got it in 1941. Caleb Compton at lot 18. Where's that at?
That's right.
Lost passing time there, basically. No, there's another one south or north of it, isn't it? Caleb Compton from Kentucky had it early on. His wife. Josiah Simpson had it in 1850s. Adam Booyer had it in 1880s. He was a laborer. Livingston had it in 41. Lot 19.
Right next door.
Benjamin Ashba had that. Dr. Irwin had it in the 50s. Thomas William, the painter, had it in the 60s. William York, a lot of York family in and out around the town. Civil War, some 1870s. Joshua Simpson, 1850s also. Adam Boer, 1880 to 1914. There's a lot of Boers in the area. Sarah Burns had it from 1862 to 1869, and Martin Munya, 1870. And Munya's had a store later on. And of course, John Livingston got it in 1941. Lot 20.
It's down right south or north Washington Street.
Trying to see where it started out with. I think Ashba had it, he sold it. Let's see here. A lot of people had this lot over the years. Ashba sold it to this David Anderson, whose wife died tragically in a horse accident, buggy wash, in the 1860s, so he left town. Oh, James Shields was the first one that had it. He was a businessman, so I don't know why he had that house. Probably lived in it. It wouldn't have been a place to merchandise. He had it until the 60s. His brother owned it 63 to 72. They were both postmasters of the town. David Anderson had it in the 60s. Alfred Bowen and his wife Elizabeth had it in the 1870s to 1880. That's one of the merchants. Sarah Burns, 62 to 69. The Lewis family had it in 1857-58. James Reed, another businessman, 1870 to 77. Must have been John Reed's brother. And then George Parson had it from 1880 to 91. And, I messed up on that. Originally it was owned in Lot 20 by Richard and Elizabeth Wilson. They were early people. They actually were part of that church that was at Norfolk in the 1830s.
Oh, yeah.
So they owned that from 37 to 57. So they must have resided there until then. And then that's when all the merchants, people came and bought it, lived there, owned it. And who knows? If all these were rented, I have a lot of names in my bank. They were here in the census. They don't say where they live, but I'm sure they rented. So at 22, Benjamin Ashba. James F. Armstrong, who was in the Civil War, owned it from 58 to 63. James Reed, a storekeeper, owned it. Alfred Bowen owned it, storekeeper. Huff Watson owned it later on, and he sold it to Jerry Du Bois in 1943. So, and John Davis, actually 1890s and 1900, he was a storekeeper too. He owned that, but it wouldn't have been a store. Which one was that? 22. Which building was it?
Right there.
Could have been a store.
It's
Okay, it could have been. It was on the road. Yeah, he owned that. Nancy Scott. Okay, she had it from 1885 to 1900. She's the one that had Eagle Eyes, her son, that came to town. Run away with the Indians and was a Chippewa and was captured by the Cody gang. During the 1870s, the government army captured him and brought him. Had a choice, and he came back to live with his wife, his mother, Nancy Scott, 1886.
No.
Eagle Eye was his name.
Eagle Eye.
Daniel Latour, I think it was his name, but they called him Eagle Eye. And so some reporter had come out and interviewed him, and there was a big write-up on him. His misadventures of being captured by the Chippewas and then by the going across the Mississippi and part of the Sioux Indians before they were captured. So we at lot 23, right south of it.
Yeah, it's right next door.
Samuel Henry, I think he was a landlord. Hugh Shields, businessman, James Reed, Roush, Nancy Scott, F. Watson. So that was what was that one at? That was another store possibility, probably the house. Either one or the other, 22 or 23. One was a house and one was a store, would be my guess. 24, lot 24, John Walls, 1850s and 60s. Jacob Fisher, a wagon maker, had owned that for a while in the 1850s. John Reed, storekeeper, owned Alfred Bowen. All these same names. What number was that again? 24?
24.
Okay, that's where the gas station was in the 20s.
Ah.
George E. Smith owned it. It was a standard station.
Standard.
So it had been right on the highway. I just got worked in there. It could have been closer to the road. That lot was in there. Yeah, the lots, and I forgot to tell you that, were 132 by 66s. So they weren't small lots. See, I have a lot that size in Burlington. It's a deep lot. They weren't small, so you can see how they could divided that one. You could easily put two houses into a store or whatever.
So these are pretty big houses, though.
I would imagine, yeah. And that's
Like
one of the things I failed to bring
stores.
you. The Reef family had a picture. They were told it was probably Prince William. There's 7 houses in a row. They're not small houses, but it doesn't say anything on the picture. But we're pretty sure it's Prince William because there's no other town that looks like this. Just 7 houses. Well, Reef said they had a store there until about 1900, so it's probably that.
Yeah.
It wasn't ever labeled on the back of it. So we're at lot 25. Richard and Elizabeth Wilson early on. Storekeepers, David Anderson, Alfred Bowen, George Bowen, John Reed. So all the businessmen owned that until Livingston bought it in 41. Lot 26 was the school. Did I tell you that earlier?
Down here.
Yeah, that's where the school was.
Yeah.
I messed up. I told you wrong.
He said 16, but it's,
It's
26. 26,
yeah.
actually.
That's where the
Okay.
school was. So
26 is the school.
I think that there was probably a house on there too because Hugh Shields had it, Reed had it, Bowen had it, McInerney had it. So I think it was divided. Like I said, these lots were big.
Yeah.
133 by 66s. But some of these, I mean, how do you own a school lot? Because the school was there till 1920, so they had to split that. At some point, maybe they were running out of room. They said, well, you got this, so let's just buy this. Because I didn't show you this, but I have a list of all the transactions. This was fun. You talk about a fool's paradise here. Starts. Pages. That's all the town lots.
Oh wow.
It starts here. Starts
here?
Here. Pulls it over. Lot 1 all the way through 32. All the transactions over the years. I went down to the courthouse in Delphi. Spent probably
So this is
I
when
don't know,
they
200-300 hours. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just imagine had gone through all those books.
This is when they were purchased.
The prices. No, I wasn't just playing around here. I was trying to get serious on this thing.
Yeah.
As you can see.
Ooh. I wonder what that would be in today's USD.
There was some big money, like $2,000 back there and some of that.
Yeah, like I wonder how much that would be like today's money.
That was when the rolling mill, so yeah, that was a prominent lot back then.
Yeah, like 2,000.
It's quite a bit of money back in
Oh,
1870.
yeah. I can imagine. And you got 4,000 one down here. And 1873.
How many pages is there? Maybe. At least a
This
dozen.
was just in lot 7 so far. Oh, yeah.
So that's how I compiled this little list of what I'm telling you. Went through and basically people own lots. There was a couple guys invested that they didn't sell it, and they realized that the town didn't come together.
Yeah. It's one of these places that were sold for $1.
Yeah, Livingston, he did that. And I have a list of the school enumerations of how all people had at school there over the years.
It's a Democrat school township to John Livingston. It's $350. Cool.
And I have a list of stores go all the way through, which we've already talked about.
Yeah.
Here's the different trades that people lived in town. We had a millinery store, and the Weaver family owned that. Insurance agents were Thomas Weaver and James Weaver. Millers, Samuel Weaver, Chisholm family, Hugh Shields, Caleb Compton, James Weaver, and John Chittick were all Weavers, or Millers, I'm sorry. Butcher was John Swander. Barbers, Bert Pittman and John Davis. So he had a barber shop there. They had a store too, so they were probably just kept here in their stores. Wagon makers over the years, Jacob Fisher, Thomas Williams, Nathaniel Ashbrook, Sebastian Roush, William York and Sons, all made wagons in town. Shoe and boot makers and dealers, John Brown, Samuel Patrick, John Kemmerer, Sanford Bowen, John Mills, and Alfred Pittman were all shoe and boot makers or salesmen. Blacksmith, Joseph Fleming, James Weaver, Josiah Fatzinger, Henry Ashby, William Hughes, Isaac Watson, who had the farm just south of town, so they never really lived in town. Nathaniel Ashby and Jonathan Fox.
Yeah.
Hotel keepers, Hugh Shields, James Reed, William Nipper, and Mrs. Julius, John Julius' wife. Carpenters, there was a bunch of them. John Hammond, Charles Fleming, Charles Taylor, who was Laura Taylor's husband, my relative. W.H. Logan, Caleb Compton, John Nagel, T. Rugemer, William Roth, George Smith, Samuel York, John Slander, and John Collins in the 1910s and 20s are all carpenters. Coopers, Daniel Egler, I think I mentioned his name earlier, John Ratliff, Abram Holdcraft, and Peter Hall. Some of these people probably rented, that's why they didn't have land. They were town lots. Stone brick mason was David Anderson in the 1880s. Sawyers were Felix Randall and Elijah Rice. Auctioneers, Isaac Watson, and then Erwin Snyder in 1910s. Livestock dealers were William Thompson, William Weaver, Samuel and Vern Bollinger. Tanners were John Roush and Jonathan Fox. Teamsters, Sanford Bowen and James Davis. Painter, Richie Williams in the 1850s. He's the one that worked with the guy that made the wagons, painted the wagons. And then there were agents for newspapers. Oh, the steam sawmill. Forget that. Alfred Bowman, John Sebastian Roush, Robert Moore, Isaiah Redmond, and Oscar Tansey. I haven't told that story yet, have I? The last owner of the steam sawmill, Oscar Tansey. I think it was in the 1880s. I wish I had that with me. It's on a computer. On the front page it says, Oscar Tansey loses his head.
Oh.
What was your first thing that would go in your head? The guy went crazy and did something, right?
Or some accident happened at the mill.
Well, that's exactly what happened.
Uh-oh.
He went to pull back and he slipped and he fell into the sawmill and chopped his head off.
Oh.
And so he had two little children, two sons, and there's still some Tansies around. That was a tragedy just outside of town. And then after that, there was not much about the steam sawmill. So maybe at that point, nobody had the heart to use it. After that, I don't know. But, very front page that day. Yeah, I forgot about that one.
It's all good.
So how far did we get into lots?
26, I think.
Okay,
So
27.
27, yeah.
Henry Ashbrook had it until 1870. That would have probably been the son. He was a blacksmith. Robert Hazlitt. And there's another tragedy. They owned the house where Jervis, north of town, is, and supposedly there was a murder there, and there was a big trial, and I think he was acquitted, but one of the Haslets, I don't know which one. It was a big deal back in the 1800s. But there was no guilty verdict there. Say lot 28.
I just hope that background noise is not gonna.
James Reed, Nancy Scott, Henry Strauss, John Young, and Huff Watson, 28.
28 down here.
Could have been a store too, because Huff Watson had the last store. John Julius had it in 1860s. Henry Lewis, so Ashby probably had that till then. 29, William and Mary Stewart. Sold it to Hugh Shields, businessman. Peter O'Farrell. He had it. Elizabeth and Richard Wilson would have been the first owners of that. Alfred Bowen. And so it was all these people there. John Ashby, Erwin Snyder, John Roush, John Young. All these same names keep coming over and over and over.
They just move houses, or?
I think they just bought lots because they had the money. About 30. Henry Lewis. Jacob Fisher, the wagon maker, had it. So maybe that's where his wagon shop was early on in the 1850s. Then the painter bought it from Thomas Williams, and then the storekeepers bought it. Edward Munia had a store, so maybe that's where the store was, one of the last stores. It's right on the road too, right? John Young, John Roush.
Nearby the road.
And by 41, Livingston had it. 31.
Down this way. Right off of
There wasn't much on there, but it looks like Ashby had it all the way up until Peter O'Farrell bought it. And then Captain McInerney had it, and James Reed, both of the businessmen, had it. And lot 32 was not sold until the 1870s, William York. It was a big bunch of York family. A lot of them were in the Civil War, so they were in and around town. There's a lot of family that I haven't discussed that were in and around town, but I'm just talking about specifically the town. There's a lot of influential people like the Watsons, the Roll family, the Briney family, the names I haven't brought up. There's tons of them. They were real close to town and were part of the activity, but not really living in town or not really having a store in town. But their names keep coming up over and over.
Yeah.
Commodore Perry Briney is another name. They said that Gracie Davis, they think, was probably the last person, her and Hef Watson, that lived in town. Gracie died in the 50s. I think Hef Watson died in the 40s. So specifically, if you don't count Lot 11 with the Du Bois, I've been told by some of these, Ski Watson was another name, Watson. So those were the last people that you consider. Gracie Davis, her dad was John Davis, and he had a store in town in 1900. So, but she died in the 50s. So she was the little girl that lived there in town. So maybe up till the 20s and 30s.
Man.
And Hef Watson, the same thing. So
Cool.
and the town died.
Yeah.
That's why we call it a ghost town.
Thank you.
Can I get a box, please? The fun part's going out there and
Oh, yeah.
looking at us.